Good morning and welcome to this very important session. Before we begin, I'd just like to say that because we're talking One Health, it does not in any way refer to the One series of India that Mr. Ram referred to in the previous session. So it is actually what Dr. Soumya very succinctly said in the reel that she made for the Hindus' social media. She said it's about living in harmony. It's about understanding that interconnectedness between animal health, plant health, and environmental health. But if we were to just rewind a little bit and we go back to the period where we might think that that this concept of climate change at least entered the human consciousness, it was probably with An Inconvenient Truth, the Oscar documentary, famously anchored by Al Gore, which showed us these ghastly signs and shocked all of us, but also a lot of derision for what happened there. Today, as we sit here, we hear that the US president, the new president who's going to be inaugurated, will be inaugurated in a ceremony inside the Capitol, in the Capitol Rotunda, because of freezing temperatures. So it is very clear today that there has been a change in the way we perceive things because of extreme climate events across the world. Because even in this city, we have seen huge floods, we have seen storms, and we have seen flooding that's caused devastation. Dr. Soumya, do you think naturally, climate change and the whole concept of One Health, which might emerge from this, is taken more seriously these days?
Thank you very much, Ramya. And I think when we look back, our traditional societies and people, indigenous people who've lived on this planet, really understood what One Health was about. I think we, people who have been educated in the more modern world, and I think this whole concept of anthropocentricness emerged probably sometime in the 17th century or so, where the Europeans, were getting into the industrial age, and where the British Empire and many other European nations actually colonized the world. And the concept there was that the earth was a thing, an inert thing, and something to be plundered, something to be used for humans, and that everything revolved around human beings. And I think it's been, 300 years of that kind of practice that has brought us to this situation today, where I would say that we are hurtling towards disaster. The planet is hurtling towards disaster because of 3 or 4 interconnected things which are happening, and it's all related to the concept of One Health. The first one, of course, is the loss of biodiversity. The fact that species get extinct is well known. Species do get extinct, but the rate of that extinction, the species extinction is generally at about 1 to 5 species per year. That's the historical rate. Today, it is 1,000 to 10,000 times more across all species, not just the big animals, the visible ones like the mammals, but across insects, birds, fish, microbes, and corals, of course, and so on. And the extinction of each species does have an impact on the entire ecosystem. So this is something that is extremely worrying and as grave, if not more, I would say, than climate change. The other big threat, of course, is global warming, climate change, and we've seen that 2024 has already been, we've already crossed that sacred 1.5 degrees warming that at 2015 in Paris, countries had agreed to do everything possible to mitigate greenhouse gases emission so that we can keep the global warming from going above 1.5. And that the reason for that is that, as scientists have predicted, that above 1.5, you start going into very dangerous territory. You start tipping what are called the tipping points, where there could be certain things which you reach the point of no return, and then in turn that triggers another catastrophe and another one. And the melting of the Antarctica, the melting of the glaciers, the ice caps, that's one such. But there are others like ocean currents and things. If they get reversed, then the climate on Earth will become completely difficult. Of course, human beings also have a comfortable temperature range in which we can survive. And once the temperatures start going above that range, then many areas of the world will become incompatible with human life. And I think India is very much in the hot spot there. The third big driver of change, of course, is pollution, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, light pollution. Because of our cities and the light that we emit, so many species are impacted. So these three, planetary biodiversity loss, climate change, global warming, and pollution of air, water, land, etc., are interconnected and are essentially driving us to a situation where neither humans will survive nor, of course, it may take thousands of years. It's not like human beings will die out in a few years, but certainly other species are dying out at a very, very rapid rate. And this is why I think this concept of One Health, where we really look at all living beings, because we have one planet and all species have to survive on that planet. I think Rachel Carson put it very well in her book, Silent Spring, in 1962, where she said that in nature, nothing exists alone. And we might think that, okay, one species, what difference does it make? But there are many, many examples around the world now where just one species, it could be a frog or a toad or a moth or a butterfly or the vultures, for example. What does the extinction of that, again, due to drugs that human beings produced and used in livestock, we have lost today 97% of vultures in India. Supriya knows that all too well. And the loss of vultures then affects the whole cycle of waste, how carcasses are disposed and eaten. And if we don't have vultures, what happens to all those animal carcasses and the spread of diseases? So I think we can talk about later maybe the emergence of pandemics and how that's related, but that's also very much related to all these things that I mentioned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumya. I think, we've come to that, interesting point here, Supriya. For those of you who are not aware, Supriya Sahu was the Environment and Forest Secretary and is now the Health Secretary. So in some senses, you are like perfect for this session. So what I wanted to ask you was, given that in countries like India particularly, there is a density of population, animal, livestock, and humans live in very close proximity. There's extension into natural habitats. So this has been increasing over the years. How do you think in a country that is so dense, we will be able to handle something like One Health?
Very difficult. Not because it cannot be done. Certainly it can be done, but because I think the kind of work that we need to do is humongous. To go towards a direction where everybody understands the importance of One Health. While it is something which we are, calling it as a new concept, but it has always been there. It's always been. I'll take forward what Soumya actually mentioned in her comment. Last point, she was mentioning about vultures, the disappearance of vultures, in India. And the recent study at Warwick by Frank and Anant Sudarshan shows that certain districts from where vultures have disappeared, the rate of human death has increased, or it is more, by 4.7% in comparison to other districts in India. Even if you look at the economic cost of the One Health or the climate change that we are talking about, it is catastrophic. It can be completely throwing communities off guard and make them extremely vulnerable and further bringing them down to the level of poverty. But there is also good news. The good news is that this awareness is coming very soon. You're realizing that, even a single thing like vaccinating the domestic cattle and dogs in and around the forest areas or sanctuaries is going to be one of the most effective strategies to control the spread of diseases and protect wild animals and protect forest. So this kind of thinking is coming. One example is Panna Tiger Reserve in India, where government of Madhya Pradesh and government of India, also the Wildlife Institute of India, they have started this initiative of bringing the One Health concept for the Tiger Reserve. And that is what we actually need to look at. So coming back to your question, Ramya, I think there is an urgent need to have that understanding. Bring it in the policy, A. And that is something which will be the first step. So Government of Tamil Nadu, in the Department of Health, we have brought out a government order saying that we would be setting up the One Health Climate Hub, which will work on all these things, which will work on the policy, which will work on the surveillance, work on the coordination mechanism, because there are many players in this sector. So as Soumya was also mentioning, it's not something that one person, one department, or one particular individual can do. It is something that has to be the team effort. So I think it is difficult. It is quite, it's looking very daunting. But initiatives have already begun. So I'm very sure in the near future, if the efforts are put in together, we have something solid to look forward to.
Right, thank you for that. We'll circle back to the Tamil Nadu's One Health scheme. But meanwhile, thank you, Dr. Soumya, for bringing up the pandemic. That's a very important segment of what we... Has that, it has been the result of this, coexistence in a dense planet. But has it also changed our perspective in terms of being aware of climate change and the need to take certain precautions, or to look at the whole thing as one planet?
I think it certainly has, but how much the lessons of the pandemic have been learned by governments and how much they're going to act still remains to be seen, because I think human beings tend to go through panic and neglect. Same thing happens with governments. When you're faced with this crisis, then of course you're panicking and wanting to do everything possible, but when things tend to start going back towards normal, then one doesn't really want to exert. But the problem is that unless we do things now to prepare in peacetime, the next pandemic may be before us very soon. In fact, the rate at which the pandemics have been coming has really increased, and that's for many reasons, including some of the things we talked about earlier. Wildlife and domestic animals are much more closely interacting now than they ever used to. We are also changing land use. We are cutting forests because we want to build housing for ourselves. And there is, of course, international travel and trade, including illegal trade of wildlife, and then the presence of wet markets in some countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, China and other Southeast Asian countries, where a number of animals are kept in these markets. They are live and very close proximity. And then, of course, they are killed and sold for meat. But before they are killed, these animals can be transmitting through their body secretions, viruses to each other. In fact, this is how viruses evolve. They keep changing, they keep mutating, and ultimately that one final mutation enables them to transmit from human to human. So we think that's what happened with SARS-CoV-2. It's a virus that's been there in bats. Coronaviruses are there in bats, thousands of types. And we've had 3 coronaviruses so far that have infected humans. The influenza viruses, of course, are the most likely to cause pandemics, and the H5N1 that's circulating in cattle farms in the US is, I would say, we're at a dangerous point there, because it's a matter of time before there's a reassortment of genes and the virus acquires the ability. Today, it can infect humans, but it can't go from one human to another. But the H5N1 virus has a 60% case fatality rate, as opposed to SARS-CoV-2, which had, much lower than 1%. The 2009 H1N1 pandemic also had a very low fatality rate. But the next influenza epidemic, if it's with a virus that has a high mortality rate and it's airborne, the respiratory virus, it can be really devastating, much worse than the pandemic we've all experienced. And this is why surveillance is important, data is important, data sharing is important, and the One Health type of surveillance is important, because these viruses are circulating in other species before they jump to humans. So whether it's, and they don't harm those animals necessarily, animals are living with those viruses. So whether it's wildlife, birds, ducks and geese and so on, which then give it to poultry, domestic poultry, other mammals, we have viruses circulating in goats that when they infect humans can cause very severe hemorrhagic diseases. We don't really have a good map and a picture, and I think Dr. Vijay Chandru is here in the audience. He and colleagues have developed this health heat map of India. I think if we can build on such digital infrastructure and build heat maps of not only human health, but animal health and biodiversity and wildlife. There have been attempts in the US and other countries. That would give us a much better handle of the data and would allow us to be better prepared. Human beings may be the last point. So once we detect the infection in humans, it's already too late. We've lost the chance to prevent that transmission. And this is why it's really important to have good animal surveillance, but very closely linked with, and this is what I think Tamil Nadu is hopefully going to do now through this One Health hub.
Right, so I have to ask this question now. So what about the Tamil Nadu's One Health policy? How does it work? And what is the origin story of, because I think Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are two states in the country that are fiercely pursuing a One Health policy.
Thank you, Ramya. Not many of you will be knowing that the wastewater that is generated, say, in a city, whether it is Bangalore or Chennai, or the sewage that is generated, that is an excellent indicator of the diseases that are prevailing and that are likely to come. Maybe some people might be knowing that during COVID pandemic, you could analyze the water, the wastewater, and you could see the viruses that are present in that wastewater. So it was very interesting for us, Government of Tamil Nadu, when we organized a session with the kind of surveillance methodologies that are available. And it was really interesting to know that in Bangalore, you have a very comprehensive system that is right now being implemented by the Indian Institute of Science, where they are analyzing the wastewater, sewage water samples, and setting up a kind of a surveillance mechanism to see what kind of diseases and what kind of pathogens are available. So I think we need to look at these kind of signs to make sure that we don't end up into the kind of pandemics that are now, kind of coming very frequently. A, because it makes sense to be, prepared to prevent it. B, the cost of such pandemics can be humongous. If I ask you, how many of you would know what would be the approximate cost of the COVID-19 pandemic? I don't know how many of you will be able to know this. Or will you be able to tell this? Not many people know that the cost of COVID pandemic is something like 11 trillion US dollars. And it is still being calculated. The impact is not known fully. Similarly, the Ebola pandemic that had erupted a few years back, it costed about 45 billion US dollars. So every pandemic or every disease that breaks out, it has a huge economic burden. And I think that is something which we need to understand. Looking at the social cost, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, it is absolutely catastrophic because it can push people into deep poverty. And there can be several kinds of, social impacts, mental impacts that cannot be calculated in terms of money. Therefore, it makes sense for us to kind of be ready. And therefore, to kind of look at the future, see what kind of, policy we should have. What we are planning to do in Tamil Nadu is to set up an environmental surveillance mechanism, which is to look at these kind of signs. At this point of time, you have the Animal Husbandry Department that collects data about the zoonotic disease breakouts, but that data is not, put out in a coordinated fashion. You also have the Forest Department. A lot happens inside the forest, in the buffer area of the forest. As we say, that mostly fever comes from the forest, or the forest has got fever, like you have the Nipah virus or the Zika virus. How do we make sure that different departments of the government, they work together, collect the data, and work together to see what's happening around us? So the Forest Department, Animal Husbandry Department, Agriculture Department, which deals with all fertilizers, pesticides, Pollution Control Board. Soumya mentioned about different kinds of pollution. And of course, the Health Department. So the first I mentioned about the environmental surveillance mechanism. Second is a coordinated mechanism where an integrated data could be kind of gathered. That is something which we are working upon. Third is, if you have something like monkeypox, which you know is there around you, and, it can come anytime. In any state, it can come. In fact, we have had 2-3 kind of instances where we had the scare. And fortunately for us, that did not turn out to be monkeypox. But then we worked out SOP. So working out SOPs for different kinds of disease outbreaks is the third point that we would be working. Fourth is, Soumya is also a part of the Governing Council on Climate Change, and I have Sundar in this hall, who is also our member in the Governing Council in climate change. The Governing Council is also working on important issues of heat strokes. You mentioned, Ramya, sudden flash floodings, or the sea rise. So what do we do in circumstances like this? How do we make sure that people are protected? How do we make sure that infrastructure is resilient to kind of face these kind of situations? That would be the fourth pillar of working closely with the Tamil Nadu Governing Council. And the fifth, but one of the most important, is building repository of information, building capacities, training doctors, training experts, training communities as to how do we deal with situations like this. So these are the points that would be taken up in the climate initiative that we have.
Right. I'm going to come back to you with a different angle on this. But at the moment, Dr. Soumya, how do existing health systems, the structures that we have in this country, how do you think they can adapt themselves to meet this One Health challenge?
So the first thing, of course, is that, government and all of us tend to work in silos. So as Supriya was saying, this effort in Tamil Nadu is an attempt to break those silos. Because I think data, and we saw during the pandemic how difficult it was to get high quality data and make it available to people, to experts, to scientists, and so on. So I think we have to put a little more focus really on data, how we're going to collect it, the quality of the data. And because India is such a leader, in the digital space, it should be, we have so many technology companies and startups, it should be possible, I think, to bring up a sort of a platform where we can have this integrated data. And there is a big mission now from the government called the One Health mission, which is also promoting that to happen. I think it's also important to have proper regulation and a regulatory agency that has the teeth and the powers to actually take action. Because as I mentioned, a good example is air pollution, which covers the entire Indo-Gangetic plain. Even though we hear mostly about the pollution in Delhi, it's actually people across India today are breathing air, which is way, way above the WHO cutoff for clean air. And so there's a lot of scientific evidence now that every unit of PM 2.5 that you cross above, say, the cutoff of 5 or 10 that the WHO gives, you are putting your health at risk. And it's not just respiratory or people. That's, again, I think a big focus. And Supriya, when she was Environment Secretary, started a big movement to use cloth bags, the Manjapai scheme instead of plastic. But if you go to any of our coastal cities, I was in Rameshwaram a week ago, the amount of waste, the amount of plastic, and the stories that those fishermen and fisherwomen told us, about the fisherwomen there have this traditional way of seaweed fishing where they actually dive and collect seaweed from around the islands in Rameshwaram. And they said that over the last 10 years or so, the yield has gone down so much. There's so much more plastic in the water. It's predicted actually by 2050 there'll be more plastic in our oceans than fish. Can you imagine what that would be like? And our corals, of course, are dying rapidly because of the warming of the sea. And if corals die, then a whole ecosystem that they support also dies. So things are very dire, and the livelihoods of millions of our people who live along the coast is now really, really severely threatened. I was also at Chilka Lake a few weeks ago in December in Orissa, and it was so wonderful to see that the villagers around Chilka who used to poach the birds that come there, it's a big, it's the second largest, it's the largest brackish water lagoon in Asia actually, the second largest in the world. And they were known as poachers of those birds. They used to eat the meat and sell it. They have turned into conservationists. And today, through ecotourism, they earn their living. It's a very, very basic and meager living that they earn. But they have decided they will live coexistence with the birds rather than, try to make a living out of poaching those birds. So there are these community initiatives and efforts which I think are glowing good examples and best practices that we need to talk about. But I have really been thinking that in India we need an environmental health regulatory agency, similar to agencies like the EPA in the US. God knows what's going to happen to that from next week onwards, and others in Japan and Germany and so on, that integrate health and environmental and climate data so that you don't look at these things separately. But when people think about climate change, the images we used to see in the past were of a polar bear stuck on an iceberg. And so you think, okay, the poor polar bear is suffering, but what does that have to do with me? I can carry on with my life. But the fact that climate change is the biggest threat to our health today and our very survival, if people can begin to understand that, and as Supriya said, I think people need to understand the risks that they're taking. People who are building houses and big resorts and things, a few meters away from the sea, should know that in the next few years, those may be washed away by a big tidal surge. And when I was listening to Amitav Ghosh last week in Delhi, when been very prescient about some of these things that have happened. But actually, if you think about it, the scientists have predicted all of these things. It's a matter of time. But we don't take it seriously, right? We like to live in the moment. So I think everyone has to take it seriously, but most of all governments and policymakers, because that's where it can start. And if we make good laws, we have good governance, and of course then comes the financing, and then looking at policies in each sphere. Agriculture, are we doing the right thing? I think India is very lucky to be one of the biodiversity hotspots globally. We are one of 17 countries with the maximum biodiversity, and we've retained a lot of that. So that we have something to be proud and happy about. But we're also most heavily populated, as you mentioned, and so we're what's called a biodiversity hotspot, where there's great chances of species extinction. So I think we can take the lead, India can take the lead with a new model of development that does not follow the traditional Western model of consumerism, but really we try to live in harmony with nature, where everybody can have a better quality of life but without exceeding nature's limits.
Right. So going back to the silos, silo approach that we have, human beings prefer to work in silos. When there is a crisis, we are happy to come together, like you saw during COVID and during the Lit Fest now. We are one whole. So is it possible to sustain this coalesced working approach over the long time? Because we're talking about this being the future, One Health, so working together is the future. How is the experience in Tamil Nadu?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I'll definitely try. In my perspective, I will bring it again back to the communities. Tell me one initiative or one successful program which has happened just because it is regulatory in nature. I think it's very difficult to pinpoint at anyone. So I think if there is a program which works with people, especially involves local communities, in a comprehensive way, not in a way of tokenism, then I think you have the recipe for success. So I think that is what governments are also learning, and it is my personal experience also, whether it is an anti-plastic movement or like you mentioned about Manjapai, or it is about, education, or it is about empowerment. When you have people, believing and becoming a part of that particular program or initiative that you are talking about, then definitely it's going to be sustainable. You can sit back and you will know that it will go forward. So I think it's important that when a program is designed at that stage itself, a huge amount of consultation has to be there to see what people want, local communities want. Is it sustainable? Number two, what is going to be their role? I'll just give an example because it's always good to give examples and, talk about it. It's an example of mangroves. So everybody, knows about the role mangroves have and how they are the real superheroes of climate change. But in spite of the fact that we know the role mangroves play, we have not actually been able to, extend the area under mangroves and kind of take it forward. But I think now there is an understanding. Studies have proved. And what studies? I mean, the real examples you can see when tsunami hit Tamil Nadu, villages which actually escaped from the most damage were the villages which were protected by mangroves. It's a fact. And even today, there was a recent report, I'm not able to recall the figures that were mentioned, but the recent report shows that wherever mangroves are thriving, the local communities, fishing is hitting the roof. They are really earning quite a bit because, you have the entire biodiversity coming back to that area, whether it is fish farming or prawns or whatever. My own experience when I interacted with the local communities in Pichavaram is that the women who were fishing told me that their income has come down at least by 70%, after the degradation of mangroves, because the biodiversity is gone. The phytoplankton, which is there at the bottom, is not there. The lessons are, now there is evidence that you involve local communities in these kind of areas, creating, the nature-based solutions, whether it is planting trees or whether it is creating a kind of a natural shield to protect them against the cyclones or against the flash floods or protecting mangroves. These are the strategies that are going to benefit our planet. So I think it's time that departments, I'm very sure that the departments are understanding. They are coming together. For example, in Pichavaram, 3 departments are working together. I can see my colleague Chandramohan is here. So the tourism department is also working with the local community, closely working with the forest department, and also working with the revenue department, which is at local administration, to see to it that mangroves are protected. Tamil Nadu has approximately 40 square kilometers of mangroves. at this point of time, and government has planned to expand it and put out another plant 60 square kilometers of mangroves more in the coming 4 months. Soumya and Sundar know about it as members of the governing council. I think this is a solid action which is going to really help the state of Tamil Nadu. So Ramya, very difficult to say how do we break the barriers of communication, but as I said, that good thing is that these evidence-based studies are now coming, and departments have certainly realized that working together is multiplying the impact of the action of the government.
Lovely. So, Dr. Soumya, I'm aware that the MSSRF has done a lot of work in mangrove conservation and for decades now. And both of you have spoken about community initiatives and how that has helped change the, the pitch, basically. But now I'd like to turn to IT as a tool. There are a number of initiatives that are happening using digital technology in healthcare, in environmental conservation as well. So what is the role of, say, digital technology or even AI in managing One Health?
I think technology can really play a very, very big role. It has already, and I think it will continue to do more. And there are many applications of digital tools and machine learning and AI algorithms. Just a few examples from the foundation's own work. Even before the days of the internet, using satellite technology, we had these village resource centers and village knowledge centers set up, run by local community members, that would provide the kind of information that was needed there, either by the farmers or by the fishing community, so that their own decisions that they take could be based on data knowledge, whether it's market prices or whether it's knowledge about pests and pathogens. We've trained progressive farmers across Tamil Nadu to use, to detect plant diseases using, they're called plant doctors actually, and the same thing could be done for veterinary. I was thinking for livestock, I think we need a whole army of people out there who are looking at our livestock as well, who can detect just using an ordinary magnifying glass and give advice to farmers on which treatment to give, because otherwise they tend to apply a lot of pesticides and things. I think the use of antibiotics in the aquaculture and in the farm sector, that's leading to growing antimicrobial resistance and impacting humans. And many farmers are doing it, they don't know what they're putting into their fields. So I think a lot of education now can be also done using distance, using the mobile phones, and everyone now has and can connect on that. And then I think using AI for better prediction of hazards. I think the Met Department, the Indian Meteorological, just celebrated 150 years. They've become much better now at predicting and localizing, where cyclones are going to hit, where there's going to be heavy rainfall. So they've gone from being very broad and vague to being much, and they want to get more and more granular so they can predict at the village level. You can then use AI and historical records to be able to predict in advance, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance, that a heat wave is coming or a period of prolonged rain, so that especially our farmers, but also others, can take corrective action. So then of course the community needs to be involved very much. As Supriya was saying, we have the Ashas and the Anganwadi workers and the VHNs who are really our frontline workforce for health. They need to be equipped with information. For example, heat wave. India is going to see increasing number of deaths due to heat wave, not just humans, but also animals. So we need proactive and preemptive action. Some of it has to be regulatory and policy, but a lot of it could be behavior, and a lot of it could come from innovation. So I think there's a big role here, not just for technology and AI, but also for innovation, for research, whether it's the development of new products, new cereals and new species that are better able to survive, better ways of doing agriculture. I think we need to change some of the incentives for doing agriculture the old way and moving to better climate-friendly ways. And then finally, empowering people. I think everyone in India has a mobile phone now. Maybe everyone doesn't have a smartphone, but it's growing rapidly. And so I think this democratization of knowledge ultimately is going to empower communities to also look after themselves. And finally, I'll say that there is a lot of traditional wisdom. We shouldn't think that we have to bring all the knowledge through modern tools. We have to also learn how people have coped and adapted over these many years and build on that, build on the traditional wisdom of communities.
Thank you so much. I think it's time now to go to the questions. Please raise your hand and can you pass the mics around, please?
I would like to thank all the three ladies for a very fascinating and insightful conversation. My question is, 2024 was the hottest year on the planet, and one of the most affected community was the most disadvantaged community too. Whether it was the migrant labor, whether it was the retail vendor, whether it was the farm labor, all of them got affected. So what is the perspective of One Health on the most vulnerable section of the population of the country? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for pointing that out. You're absolutely right that not everybody is at the same risk. So I think one of the things we need to do, we've talked about mapping and plotting, and predicting climate disasters. We also need to understand where our vulnerable populations live. For example, in Chennai city, we need a map of the vulnerable people. Those who live in low-income housing with tin roofs are much more, and who don't have air conditioning, definitely are much more susceptible. And I think we need to start from them. Absolutely. We are, there's a lot of work and thought being given to this. We did a report last year on the impacts of climate change on women and children in India. And we found that there was a huge impact on women, including on increasing domestic violence during the time when it's extremely hot. So knowing these things, we definitely need to focus our attention, and the health system needs to gear up specifically to provide more support to those people, as you said, that you identified absolutely correctly, the people at high risk. And we can measure and monitor using data if we're doing a good job or not.
Supriya, want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it will also be very good to mention here that Government of Tamil Nadu, in a very pioneering effort, has notified heat wave as the state disaster. I think we are one of the first states in the country to have done so. Now, what does it mean? When you notify heat wave as a state disaster, then the entire machinery is galvanized towards taking action to make sure that people who are working during extreme heat, what steps are taken to safeguard their health. Also, government has announced monetary compensation, ex gratia compensation in case anybody gets impacted. These are some of the very impactful, pioneering steps that Government of Tamil Nadu has taken. And I think in the years to come, you're going to really see, especially for vulnerable sections, these kind of, good initiatives coming out to protect them.
Recently we've been reading about this terrible problem of hospital waste from other states. You've raised some, I'd like to congratulate all of you for having raised absolutely foundational structural issues. But the immediate issue now is very, it's actually outrageous that hospital waste from other states, which is so toxic, is being dumped in Tamil Nadu. I know that the government took immediate action, but I was wondering that for our own hospital waste, what are the stringent conditions, because it affects people in large cities like Chennai, and also what active steps can the state government take to make sure that other states don't dump their hospital waste inside our state?
Thank you, ma'am. As far as Government of Tamil Nadu is concerned, we have, through the Pollution Control Board, we have 12 biomedical waste management licensed facilities, and there is a very strict quality control that is being done. We make sure that government hospitals as well as private hospitals, they are connected. I would not say that it is really perfect, but yes, it is definitely much better, and it follows the norms that government has already put in place. So all our government facilities, they are reviewed, they are being kind of, asked to and audited to make sure that the biomedical waste is disposed of as per the norms that have been prescribed. So that is something which is very, very important and critical. About the dumping of the biomedical waste by the other states, I think that is something which the courts have also taken note of, and very strict, stringent notices have been given, action has already been taken. It should never happen. It should never happen, and I think we must make sure that these kind of things, if it is repeated, then I think, the most stringent action should be taken against the culprits. But as far as we are concerned, we are making sure that our licensed facilities are working in a proper fashion. Thank you.
Dr. Geeta there. I think that's not working. Can you?
Right? No.
So, a complex problem with, something which has no single solution. I will try to finish it very quickly by mentioning it in 3 points. One, regulation. It is not uniform throughout the country. When Tamil Nadu brings a ban on the disposable plastic, very comprehensive ban, and one of the pioneering bans anywhere in the world, you find that your neighboring states, they do not have that kind of a ban. So when you stop manufacturing, more than 120 units you close, which manufacture disposable plastic, you find it is being manufactured across your borders, and it invariably finds its way. So I think it's now Government of India, Ministry has also come out with a comprehensive ban, but they are taking it step by step. So I think we need to make sure that till the time the ban is comprehensively implemented across states, we must kind of stand very tight with our own implementation. It has got challenges, but I think we are quite good when Tamil Nadu is concerned. Not satisfactory, not happy, but something is going on here. With other states, you find that plastic is finding its way. Second point I wanted to mention was, we still need a very strong public campaign and community involvement. That is something which still needs to be done. It will take time, because we have had 4 decades of plastic invading every aspect of our life. So finding it very difficult, you find that traders and other people find it very difficult to kind of get rid of it immediately. Third point is technology. Technology is still way behind in bringing out alternatives. We have alternatives, but they are woefully inadequate. They are not able to replace something which is so easily acceptable. You can carry it anywhere, and people have great comfort with that. These are 3 things. But again, there is good news. I never want to kind of stop with disappointment. The good news is that the work is on the 3 sectors. And I think in the next 5 years, I see some very solid action happening on all these 3 fronts. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question. Ramya here, on your left.
Hi, Dr.
Hi. Just to draw attention that we have actually worked with the HIV pandemic and the prevention of a HIV pandemic using a community engagement as a tool and using NGOs as a facilitator. And Tamil Nadu has a good history of doing that. So just to ask that and also to connect the possibility of using digital technology today in order to engage and educate communities, because I think that's going to make a difference. Your comments.
You were going to add.
No, on the plastics, I was going to say reduce, reuse, and recycle. The 3 R's, have to be the principles, and we have to look at each. But I also think that industry must also play a bigger role. The industry that uses a lot of plastic and puts it out there must also encourage recycling. And today we have a program, the MSSRF has a program with the fishermen in the Park Bay to bring the ghost gear and the plastic out from the ocean. The Pollution Control Board is setting up centers to buy that plastic and then sell it to industries that will then use it for, recycling, making products. So the fishermen will also gain because they'll be paid for the plastic that they're bringing out. But the rate at which we're throwing plastic in the ocean is much higher than what they're bringing back. So we have to reduce in every aspect of our lives.
Right, time's up, but sir, since you've been standing right from the beginning, we'll give you the last question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We can't hear you though.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Eminent panelists are there, government is there, and eminent virologist is there. I'm related to her professionally. She is a pediatrician, I'm a pedodontist. Now you have
So can
covered
we,
why, no, excuse me. Why
the question.
Health you have covered. So many factors have covered, it's the tip of the iceberg. Now I'll concentrate only on virology. Okay, now we are, is it all right?
Sir, may we please request you to ask the question?
Virology itself is a very big this one. We are concentrating only on curative aspect. Preventive aspect is the most important thing. My feeling is 90% of the audience here are all carriers. Now the distance maintaining and the government take up sneezing uses. You have the habit of holding and shaking hands. And that one should be taken care of by the government. And Dr. Soumya, she is a virologist, she can give advice regarding the...
Sir, can you please stick to the question? We have overshot the time, please. Thank you.
Concentrate on preventive aspect. No, we are concentrating, spending millions.
This question is on
curative
prevention
aspect.
rather than on...
It's a comment, it's a comment.
So I think it's a good point. And I think it also relates to some health literacy in our population. We tend to panic at when we hear some new term, new virus that we've never heard before, like what happened with HMPV, which is actually a virus that has been circulating for a long time, well known. It only causes like a common cold, but because that name HMPV, and it was also linked with China, it caused this huge panic and pandemonium, and all the media channels were going on. So I think more health literacy is needed in our population, and the prevention aspect. If you have a cold, wear a mask, don't go and cough and spit in public places, wash your hands. So sanitation and hygiene are important aspects of prevention, which we need to further improve, certainly.
Dr. Soumya, you spotted Dr. Usha Sriram in the audience. One last question maybe. Dr. Usha, if you still want to ask a question, can you quickly send the mic to her, please?
Thank you so much. I think it kind of circles back to what was mentioned about the HIV activism and advocacy, and also what Supriya Sahu mentioned about a powerful campaign. And what I wanted to say was that during the COVID, the pandemic, people knew about washing hands and wearing masks and the distancing, but did not know that any of the chronic diseases put them at greater risk. That was not made aware to them at all, and the public didn't know that. So I think a really powerful campaign mentioning things like air pollution. I'm an endocrinologist, so I'm acutely aware of what it does to diabetes, what heat strokes are causing, an increased risk of stillbirths. These are all things that people are not aware of at all. Noise pollution is increasing the risk of diabetes. So if there is a campaign, and what I also want to add is if we can start this in schools, and children can be great agents of change. So that's just my thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I think on that note, we shall conclude this session. I'm sorry we can't take more questions. I think the speakers will be available for a while later. Please ask your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all three of you, for this wonderful session.